Right. Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth. I'm a hearing officer appointed by the Environmental Improvement Board to conduct a hearing in EIB 21-27. It's a rulemaking related to ozone precursors. We begin each morning with public comment, and I have three public commenters who reached out to the board's administrator, Pamela Jones, to indicate a desire to offer public comment. In the event you are on the platform and would like to offer comment and have not yet offered comment, please indicate in the chat. The chat is enabled for everyone. So please just reach out in the chat, and I'm happy to take your comment at this time or at any time throughout the hearing. We have public comment sessions every day at 9, 1, and 5. Public comment is taken through audio, not video, and is limited to 5 minutes. So Cynthia Black, the three I have this morning, and I'll call you in this order: Cynthia Black, Tom Williams, and Norma Dunn. Ms. Black, I am unmuting you. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through clearly. Thank you. If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Well, good morning. My name is Cynthia Black. I reside in Lincoln County. My background is in geology. I have 2 degrees in geology, a Bachelor of Science from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, and a Master of Science from Texas A&M in College Station. I have a 40-year career working in the oil and gas industry as a geophysicist and a geologist, and I continue to consult. Most of my life has been spent working for operators, ranging from Exxon, Arco, Occidental, and a host of small independents. I've worked in the Permian Basin, including Lee and Eddy County, as well as Texas, Oklahoma, California, Wyoming, Utah, and elsewhere in the continental United States. I've seen many cyclic changes in the industry throughout my career, most of those being huge changes in price due to a variety of reasons. The rest of this is my just brief description of what I think is going on at a higher level. The Methane Advisory Panel was formed to address most proximally methane leaking and venting in the field from various sources in the oil and gas industry. Obviously, the process that the Methane Advisory Panel has taken is admirably collaborative. It also appears that its root purpose is to address climate change. And from this, I source Governor Grisham's Executive Order 2019-03 and the statements from the New Mexico Interagency Climate Change Task Force. In the popular press, and you know, we can go to the Albuquerque Journal or other parts of the state and look at news articles, the primary goal is to reduce low-level ozone, and I stress low level as opposed to high level, which is not at issue. This would be due to the fact that in some parts of New Mexico, ozone levels have reached within 95% of EPA imposed limits. So that is an issue, and it's particularly an issue in larger population metropolitan areas like Albuquerque and Las Cruces and places like that, where you have a concentration of sources, primarily vehicles, combustion gas vehicles. So to me, the question isn't, whether or not, climate change and man-made climate change represents some kind of existential threat, but whether singling out small independent oil and gas operators in New Mexico will have any effect on these broader issues. And that's why I really wanted to address this at that level. With regard to climate change, I hardly want to go into any detail. I have a lot of background in this. I've done a lot of my own study. I'm research oriented as well as technically oriented, which obviously combine. But thanks to the media and other governmental bodies, climate change science is not well understood. But briefly, okay, pollution such as smog, i.e. ozone, low-level ozone, is conflated with this climate change. And that's just inaccurate. And it's also wrong because it prevents us from tackling pollution in a constructive way. There are ways to address ozone, for example. And it also keeps us from adapting to changes in climate. And I certainly admit that there are a fraction of climate change can be man-made, particularly in a microclimate sort of way. But it's also something we've been doing as a species throughout human history. So, just
Ms. Black, could you
briefly,
wrap up,
and
please?
uh, am I done? Because I can be, I'm about done,
All right,
really.
go
I
ahead.
just want to, thank you, just stress that the methane advisory panel recommendations, as I understand them, are going to kill off many jobs and hurt small industry and the small oil and gas operators. The big operators can afford to comply with these regs, but uh, I think it's better to let industry creatively solve these problems that they have, as they have been doing for many decades. And I've been witness to those changes in regulations, and I know what the industry is capable of doing. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ms. Black. All right, so uh, let me see here. It, um, Tom Williams, let me look for Mr. Williams on the attendee list. I don't see Mr. Williams in the attendee list. Let me move to Nora Dunn, and I believe I did see Ms. Dunn. Oh, and it's Norma Dunn, excuse me. Ms. Dunn, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
My
Hello, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you
okay,
swear?
my husband, Sandy Dunn, is going to speak.
Oh, all right, that's fine. Mr. Dunn, if
Yes, ma'am.
if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I can hear your voice clearly. Just make sure you keep your voice up, and I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Okay. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for hearing us. We appreciate it. I'm going to be speaking from a layman's term. I believe the last speaker was very good at making points from her level of experience. My level of experience is personal. I've always been fond of alternative forms of transportation and power sources, and I have electric bicycles and electric scooters and things like that. And so my mind is open, of course, to alternative energy sources. I wanted to speak a little bit about that because um, I spent a lot of years in California and a lot of time in the desert area around Palm Springs, California, where they have wind farms and things like that out there. And there were some observations I made about those alternative sources. One of them being that the actual wind farms efficiency, which there are different ways of calculating it. The methods I learned was the output versus the cost versus the environmental impact. And the wind farms are pretty low on their efficiency. I think the maximum efficiency achieved is 26% versus oil or even coal produced energy, which is almost 100%. What was noted out there was there are certain environmental issues associated with wind farms. One of them being the actual reliability of the turbines themselves. They're very high maintenance. They require specific talents of people called windmill wranglers who work way up high off the ground and work on these units, because we in the local community noticed that a lot of these windmills were spending a lot of downtime, and it was because of the basic unreliability of those units. On top of that, there were environmental concerns about the effect on bird migration, and one of those windmills can take out an entire flight of birds. And it was a real concern for a lot of people in the local environmental movement. On top of that, the blades on those things, when they wear out, they generally crack or break. They have to take them off and replace them. There's no way they can recycle those materials. They're not recyclable. They certainly don't decompose. So now they have to have special areas where they bury these blades vertically, front to back, in these really large holes. And so that's becoming a concern as wind farms are increasing in this country. We have an increased concern about what's going to happen to all that old stuff. And so along with that, I was looking into solar energy, of course, for my home. And I was pretty alarmed to find out that I had always been told that solar panels were made essentially out of silicon, and that was the primary ingredient. And it was an environmentally friendly process of producing them, which turns out isn't the truth. The actual processing that's required for producing solar panels produces all kinds of caustic, environmentally dangerous materials. Silicon dust itself that is produced when they cut the cells for these solar panels, it's called kerf, and there's up to 50% waste in the production of solar panels, and that stuff is very toxic to workers and the environment itself. Silica gas, very explosive, can spontaneously combust. Silicon production, the production reactors are cleaned with something called sulfur hexafluoride, which is one of the most potent greenhouse gas per molecule stuff. Excuse me.
Mr. Dunn, would you wrap up, please?
Oh, yes, thank you. Basically, what I'm saying is the alternatives to oil and gas, I don't really believe we're there yet. I support it for future use, but currently, if we get really ambitious about replacing oil and gas production with these alternative methods, I think the cost in itself, especially the cost to the consumer and the environment, we're just not quite ready yet. And that's really the point I wanted to make. I'm not anti-alternative energy. I really am in support of putting resources toward the development of these alternatives, but I don't think we're ready yet. And I hope I made my point without getting too confusing here.
Yes, you
Thank
did.
you. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Dunn.
once again. All right. You have a good day.
Thank you. Let's see, Mr. Mccartney reached out through the chat. Mr. Mccartney, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, your voice is coming through clearly. If you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'm starting your 5 minutes now.
Yeah, thank you for considering my comments. I'd like to speak to the issue of methane gas pollution as a generalist, the overall big picture. And the first thing is that the fossil fuel industry will and has bombarded us with how much it will cost the industry, billions of dollars to address methane leaks and methane that is 86 times as potent a greenhouse gas as CO2. What the fossil fuel industry fails to acknowledge is that Hurricane Ida cost $22 billion, destroying people's homes, property, and lives. What the fossil fuel industry fails to acknowledge is devastating forest fires in California, Oregon, Washington, etc., and the resulting smoke that we have all had to contend with the last several summers. And for a guy like me who has late onset asthma, those have not been fun summers. In the 80s, there were an average of 3 $1 billion weather events a year. Last year, there were 22. Those costs are borne by us, not the fossil fuel industry. But the real issue is the UN report last week, which stated even if all the world's nations were to adhere to their climate fossil fuel reduction pledges, the world will still warm by 2.7 degrees centigrade, and that's 5 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. This report means that we have to do way better at addressing climate change than we're even hoping to do now, so that our kids and our grandkids have a hope for a future. The methane leaks are a very doable fix that would be a huge step in the right direction. Please take that step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCartney. I don't have anyone else reaching out through chat to offer public comment. So we will, again, the next opportunity for public comment is at 1 p.m. and 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. Every subsequent day of this hearing. So thank you all very much. Before we begin the testimony this morning, and this morning we'll be focusing on economic analysis, I do need to make sure that we have Ms. Fox with us. She was having some trouble with the sign in this morning. Oh, wait.
I figured it out. Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Appreciate
terrific,
it.
Ms. Fox. Thank you. All right. Is there anything else we should do before we leap into the testimony on economic analysis? No. Council, if you would please check the panelist list. As I saw your witnesses join the attendee list, I did try to move them all over, but make sure that I got them all, if you would please. Let me know if there's someone else who should be a panelist. No? So do I understand, Ms. Katz? We're going to begin this morning with Ms. Day.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, and members of the board. That topic is Namoga's topic, and so the topic will begin with Mr. Dunham, I believe.
Mr. Dunham, and then we're going to Powell, Day, Palmer, and Lackner. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you. Is this Mr. Dunham? Yes, I see Mr. Dunham on the screen.
I am here.
Good morning, Mr. Dunham. You're a little soft.
Wait a minute.
Ask you to keep your voice up. And if you would
Okay.
please, oh, that's better, yeah. If you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do, ma'am.
Thank you very much. If you see this lady on the screen in blue is our court reporter. We're making a transcript, which is the official record of this hearing. If you see her wave her hands, I'll be watching her as well. Please stop until we figure out the audio issue. So thank you.
Okay.
And it's Mr.
Okay.
Heiser. Good morning, Mr. Heiser.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Mr. Dunham. Could you please state your name and spell it for the record, please?
Yes, sir. My name is John R. Dunham, and my last name is Dunham.
And could you state your involvement in this proceeding?
I prepared a cost report for the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, the cost of the regulation.
And is NMOGA Exhibit number 34, which was previously admitted, an accurate copy of your resume?
Yes, sir.
Could you explain your qualifications as to how they relate to your participation in the hearing today?
Yes, sir. I'm the managing partner of John Dunham and Associates, an economic research firm. Been in business for about a little over 20 years. I've been an economist for 36 years. We do economic and policy research for dozens and dozens of different industries, including the oil and natural gas industry. We prepared the economic impact study of the Western oil and natural gas industry for the Western Energy Alliance, and we've also performed regulatory impact analysis for about 6 different regulations on oil and natural gas at the federal level. We've been a consultant to the Western Energy Alliance, to NMOGA, to the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, to Anadarko, to the New Mexico, the Idaho Retailers Association, the New Mexico Retailers Association, to name a number of them.
Does NMOGA Exhibit A6 reflect your direct testimony previously filed in this matter?
Yes, sir, it does.
Does that? And you don't need to make any changes to that exhibit, is that correct?
And I don't believe so, no.
Do you adopt Exhibit A6 as your direct testimony in this matter as if you had given it during this hearing?
Yes, sir.
Did you rely on the following exhibits in preparing your testimony? NMOGA Exhibit 35, the May 2020 OEWS estimates. NMOGA 36, the Western Oil and Natural Gas Study, Economic Impact Study from 2018.
Yes, sir.
NMOGA 37, a well methodology report.
Yes, I did.
NMOGA 38, a regulatory impact analysis of the proposed emission standards for new and modified sources in oil and natural gas sector, excuse me.
The EPA report, yes.
Yes. And then also NMOGA Exhibit 39, the New Mexico crude oil first purchase price from the U.S. Energy Information Administration.
Yes, sir.
And NMOGA Exhibit 40, the Fred graph observations from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony for the board this morning?
Yes, sir, I have.
Can you please provide that summary to the board?
Yeah, how do I?
Yes.
actually-
Do you have some slides?
I do have
So-
some slides. I don't know how to.
Madam Hearing Officer, can you enable the screen share for him? She is working on it. You should see a box with a little plus, I believe.
Second. Get off the screen share. Box with a little plus.
I think that's what it looks like.
I'm sorry, I don't see a box. Oh, here it is. Yeah, got it. And I'm sharing a slide deck now.
All right, and can you make that bigger on the screen for everyone?
I'm going to do that right now.
Excuse me for interrupting,
Okay.
Mr. Heiser. Can you point us to where the slides were? Were those the slides that were sent last night, or?
So I think this is that slide. It may be, we did circulate these. Mr. Dunham, are you using the one circulated last night, or is this an earlier version?
Did you circulate one last night? I apologize.
You should have something in your email reflecting the final that was submitted.
So I trust Pam has forwarded those emails to the board members.
There it is.
Pam, if not, please do that now. We did get
Madam Hearing Officer.
yes, Ms. Katz.
Sorry, I thought you were done on that point about the presentation. I have a question, clarifying question after you're done with that. Sorry.
Is this being shared now?
We have a gray screen
Oh,
right now.
okay, let me go back to the sharing thing.
Perhaps while Mr. Dunham is pulling that up, I could ask Mr. Heiser, you identified several exhibits associated with Mr. Dunham's testimony. I don't see them identified in his actual direct test or the testimony that was submitted.
These are just exhibits that he relied upon for some of the information seen in his report. We just listed them so people know where some of the information came from.
But he didn't actually identify them in the testimony, so is that true? I'm just trying to figure that out.
All right, Mr. Dunham, did you rely on these sources of information for part of the work that you did in this presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Katz. Is this the correct exhibit? Okay, so we have the correct exhibit, and I believe this is the one that was circulated to all parties, Madam Hearing Officer. So with that, Mr. Dunham, if you could please proceed.
I apologize for the technical difficulty there. Thank you for letting me testify today. I am testifying on a report that I prepared for the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association in relation to the costs of this the proposed ozone precursor rule. My analysis showed that the rule would cost about $3.2 billion on the New Mexico oil and natural gas industry. That would be about 3.8 billion over 5 years on a net present value basis. The first year would be 3.2 billion. It would lead to a 15% loss in overall petroleum, oil, and natural gas production, of which 12.9% would be oil and 22.8% would be natural gas production. And it would also have an impact on the state's economy of about $674 billion a year, and would lead to a loss of about 3,200 jobs in the state, and a tax impact on the state of about almost $23 million. And that does not include revenues from the oil and natural gas development itself. Now, all models are based on assumptions, and the assumptions that I use in this model are listed on this slide. The number of oil and natural gas wells, I understand is in question. We derive that data from the OECD well statistics, and I believe that the natural gas well number is probably too high from what I've seen in other testimony. Now that will change the magnitude of the cost, but it doesn't really change the impact, because what matters are the costs per well. And as the number of wells go down, the number of costs go down. They coincide, so that would not really change the actual impact dramatically, but would change the magnitude of the number.
I'm sorry to interrupt,
analysis.
Mr. Dunham. Mr. Dunham, this is Felicia.
Yes.
Is there a way for you to bring your voice up We can hear you, but it's a bit of a struggle.
I would recommend, excuse me, this is Teresa. I would recommend getting rid of the virtual background, and you're looking down all the time, so you're not coming across as well. Thank you.
If I hold the microphone here, does that help?
Not too much.
Not too much. Okay. I apologize for that. I will try to speak a little louder. Is that better?
It's a little better.
I'll do my best to speak as loud as I can.
Thank you.
Some witnesses yesterday who were using headphones had better luck when they didn't use the headphones and just used the microphone on the computer. I don't know if that's a
Unfortunately,
possibility.
I don't have a microphone on this computer. I'll do my best to speak as loud as I can if this helps. So the assumptions also are based on prices at the time we did the study. At that time, the wellhead price for oil was $56.14 a barrel, and the price for natural gas was about $2,800 per million cubic feet. Our model does not account for wet gas production or the value of ancillary methane produced from primary oil wells. And that would have some effect on the overall results. The other assumptions that are used in the model are that the prices that I just provided were taken in from March for oil and from January for natural gas. Those have changed somewhat, and as prices change either up or down, they would have an effect on the overall impacts. Wage rates we took from BLS wages for the state of New Mexico. The most up to date at the time we did this were May 2020. And for our net present value, we used high yield bond rates, which are in the exhibits. Right now, interest rates are very, very low, so the net present value calculations don't change much depending on what interest rate is used. And the most important data are operational costs per facility, per well, that we received from the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, and that was based on a survey of operators in the state that they conducted. We used these, we took this data, we ran it through a model that we developed in 2018 for the Western Energy Alliance. It's a cost model for the oil and natural gas industry in New Mexico. We developed these models for each state that they represented. We updated the model to reflect the assumptions that I just discussed. And that model uses data from IMPLAN, which is the input-output model of the United States. At the time, it was using the New Mexico 2016 tables, and we separated the costs into 7 categories: exploration, permitting, drilling, completion, production, pipeline, transportation costs, and remediation. So each individual facility would have those costs outlined, and each individual well would have those costs. The revenue numbers are based on those oil and natural gas price numbers. They assume an exponential decline in production with 80% occurring in the first 4 years, and then production trailing off for 20 years until the well is depleted. It calculates the average profit margin for the base case in the state for both oil and for natural gas. And then we can shock that system with price changes, and the price changes being the costs of the regulation, both administrative and operational and capital, I should say, administrative, operational, and capital costs. And then the model rebalances by shutting down the most wells that become unprofitable based on those changes. So it shuts down the least profitable, then the next least profitable, the next least profitable, until the margins balance out. Those costs are then fed into our economic impact model of the oil and gas industry, that we produced for the Western Energy Alliance in 2018. That was the last time that model was updated. It's based on data from the physical location and employment of all oil and natural gas operations in the states that we were using, including New Mexico. And then from those employment figures, the supplier induced wages, output, all of those figures are calculated using, again, the 2016 tables, so the 2016 structure of the industry. We shocked that baseline by the 15% percentage loss in revenue that the cost model calculated. And the revenue is directly, almost linearly associated with jobs in New Mexico, because most of the jobs are not headquarter jobs, they're production jobs. And those jobs fell by about 50%. And then supplier and industry jobs are calculated based on changes in, supplier jobs are calculated based on changes in direct output, because output is the sales that are used to purchase supplies for the industry. And then induced jobs, which are the multiplier effect of the operations, the spending in the general economy by people working in the industry. Those jobs fall based on the loss in direct and supplier wages. So that is the basis of the report. As the assumptions change, we can run different numbers, which we have done. The most important values that go into the model are the price of oil and natural gas and the actual costs of the regulation. The number of wells, well, again, it changes the magnitude. It doesn't change the impact on any given facility. So if we use too many wells, the $3 billion number we came up with is too high, but the effect on the actual production is pretty close. So that is my testimony. If anyone has any questions, I can go into more detail.
Mr. Dunham, this is a type of economic model that you've prepared for a number of rulemaking proceedings across the United States. Is that correct?
Oh, dozens, yeah.
And this would be pretty typical of what you'd see for an economic impact evaluation of a new rule.
This would be what for an economic impact, it wouldn't be what you would see for a regulatory impact analysis, which would be generally conducted by the agency proposing the rule.
Okay, thank you.
At the federal level.
I believe that's all of our direct questions, Madam Hearing Officer. So we would tender Mr. Dunham for any questions from the board or other parties.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham and Mr. Heiser. Ms. Katz, do you have any questions of Mr. Dunham?
I do have some, Madam Hearing Officer. Thank you, Mr. Dunham. So I just want to make sure. So you had, Mr. Heiser asked you about some exhibits, and I just want to make clear you didn't actually reference those exhibits in your, by exhibit number in your testimony, correct?
No, those are referenced in the report that I produced for the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association.
Okay, but the actual report doesn't identify those as exhibit numbers either?
No, it does not.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that. And then, so you cite those sources, but did you, you didn't provide any of the actual numbers from those sources in your testimony, correct?
In this testimony today, or in the report itself? I'm sorry.
In your report that is attached to your testimony.
The numbers from those sources are cited in my report.
So you cite the specific numbers that you use to put together what you have in your tables. Did you provide that? I think you referenced the cost of some number relating to natural gas And I
Yeah, the
didn't see
value,
that.
yeah, the cost of natural gas, yeah, that's in one of the tables.
Okay, can
The
you
price,
point
I
that
should
out
say
to
the
me?
cost, the price.
Can you just point
It's
that out to me?
actually,
Because
Hold on, guys. We really need you to speak one at a time. So just please wait for each other.
let me just pull that report up so I have it in front of me. Am I still sharing my screen?
yes, you are.
I am. How do I stop sharing my screen? I'm sorry. This is a.
I believe the
I
hearing
don't mean to
officer
be
may have to
incompetent.
do that.
Those prices are in table 3 of my report.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. So you stated that your analysis relies on data from, quote, actual oil and natural gas companies that are part of NMOGA's membership. Did you provide any of that data to the board and the other parties as exhibits or to your testimony?
I didn't personally. That's NMOGA's data, and it's I can only share data at the request of a client since it's their data. I don't know if they provided it or not.
Okay, so they did not provide it, I will say, and so I guess so we're just supposed to take your word for that then.
Well, it is. I mean, it is. Again, it's a survey. It comes from companies, and it's outlined in table 7.
I understand, but we're just supposed to take your word for what was actually in that survey and the information in that survey and the companies and the data that they provided.
Yeah, I'm under oath, and I will say right now that it is the data from the survey. I didn't make up.
All right. So were you paid by NMOGA for to conduct that analysis?
Yes, I was.
And are you being paid to testify?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So you said that this data came from 10 companies. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how many companies operate in the state of New Mexico?
Not off the top of my head. I believe I actually have it in report somewhere. So it's a large number of companies.
So you point to inadequacies in ERG's cost estimates. Are you aware of the data and testimony provided by NMED in support of those estimates?
I've seen their testimony.
Would you agree that it is difficult to evaluate an analysis when you don't have access to the data that was used as the basis for that analysis?
Oh, I definitely agree with that.
Okay. And did you hear the testimony of the department's modeling expert, Ralph Morris, where he discussed how all the data and inputs he used for his model, as well as the modeling files themselves that were provided for review by all the stakeholders, the parties, and the public in this rulemaking?
I didn't hear any. This is the first testimony that I'm hearing from this rulemaking.
Okay. And would you agree that it is difficult to analyze the results of a model when you do not have access to the underlying assumptions of that model or to the data used as inputs to that model?
It's very difficult. It's almost impossible to analyze a model when you don't have the data, or you don't have at least access to the source of it.
Would you agree that the other parties' experts have been able to testify about what they regard as problems with the New Mexico Environment Department's cost estimates and modeling that was put forward in this rulemaking, because they had access to all the data and the full explanations for where those estimates for all those estimates and that modeling?
I don't understand the question.
Sorry, yeah, that was awkward. Would you agree that the other parties have been able to identify what they view as problems with the department's cost estimates and modeling, precisely because they had access to all the data and the explanations for those estimates and modeling?
Only based on what their testimony was that I was given to look at. I wasn't on a call listening to anybody. At the time I did this study, there was no regulatory impact model that I could find that outlined the state's cost estimates.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dunham. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. Ms. Fox, do you have questions of Mr. Dunham?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Paranos?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Yes, I just have one question, Mr. Dunham. Can you just explain whether or not you applied the costs in your analysis at the well level or at the well site level?
At the well level, the individual hole in the ground.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. James?
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right, thank you. Do we have Ms. DeVore? I don't believe so. Mr. Nykiel or Mr. Timmons?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. That was Mr. Nykiel. Mr. DeSalen?
Yes, I have a number of questions for this witness. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Mr. Dunham. My name is Charles. Okay.
Mr. DeSalen, you seem to have cut out.
Yes.
I'm wondering.
Can you hear me?
Well, yes. We may have to ask you to turn off your video if that continues.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Mr. Dunham.
Good morning, sir.
My name is Charles DeSalen, and I'm an attorney with the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, and I appreciate your testimony. I want to start out by emphasizing that I'm having a rather hard time hearing you. So I would very much appreciate it if, when you respond to my questions, you try to be as enunciate as well as you can and try to speak loudly.
I apologize for that, sir.
Oh, it's no problem. This is technology.
The joys of technology, exactly.
And I'm not as young as I used to, and there were some rock concerts in my youth, so my hearing isn't what it once was. But I want to start out by asking you a few questions about your report and what you're looking at in your report, just to make sure I understand. Now, as I understand your report, you're looking at the additional costs that the oil and gas industry would incur to comply with the proposed regulations. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
And your report also estimates the jobs that would be lost if the proposed regulations are adopted. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
And those are costs not so much to the industry, but to the larger economy?
The jobs are lost both to the industry and to the larger economy.
Okay. And then your report also looks at the tax revenue that would be lost to the state if the regulations are adopted. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, though I do not include the taxes on oil and gas production itself, the royalties.
Right. But you do include the tax revenues that would be lost, correct?
Sure, yes, I do.
And those, again, those are costs to the larger economy, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, Mr. Dunham, do you acknowledge that oil and natural gas production results in the emission of oxides of nitrogen and volatile organic compounds?
I'm not a chemist or an engineer, sir, but I would assume that oil and natural gas production does lead to emissions.
Okay. And then those pollutants form ozone in the atmosphere. Do you more or less recognize
Again,
that?
sir, I'm not a chemist, sir. I don't know how those pollutants function.
Right, I understand, and I'm not asking for your expertise as a chemist or chemistry. I'm just trying to lay a basic foundation about what this hearing is all about. And then do you understand that these substances are pollutants that are harmful to human health?
Again, sir, I'm not a doctor. I don't know how pollutants would affect human health. I'm an economist. I work with economic data.
Okay, then you wouldn't dispute any of these facts.
I can't accept or dispute them. I'm not an expert in atmospheric chemistry.
Okay, well then, Mr. Dunham, would you agree? Let's assume that these facts are correct. Okay, can we take them as a given?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, given what we just discussed, would you agree that the emission of these pollutants has costs to other sectors of the New Mexico economy other than the oil and gas industry?
In general, pollutants of all types have what economists would call externalities. So if your house is located under an airport, you have externalities due to the sound and the emissions from airplanes, and that would be priced in the property value of your property. It would be a lower property value than one that would not be under an airport runway. So it would be the same sort of thing.
Okay, and so I'm going to get into externalities with you in a bit, but I just want to establish that there are costs to other sectors of New Mexico economy as a result of the release of or the emission of these pollutants. And when I say other sectors, I mean other than the oil and gas industry. Is that correct?
If the statements that you made were true, again, I can't vouch for that, then that would lead to other costs.
Okay. Now let's take a couple of examples. For example, the emission of harmful pollutants would result in increased medical bills, right?
It's possible.
Okay, but your report doesn't include those costs, does it?
Now, my report was to look at the costs of the regulation on the production of oil and natural gas.
Right, and emission of harmful pollutants could result in lost days of work due to illness. Is that correct?
Again, that is possible.
Okay, but your report doesn't attempt to quantify those costs either, does it?
Again, it's my job to calculate the cost of the regulation. It would be a regulatory impact analysis that would look at externalities, social costs, potential benefits, etc.
Okay, and emission of harmful pollutants could result in higher mortality rates. Is that also correct?
Again, based on what you suggested as a given, if pollutants cause health problems, that could result in various types of health problems, including possibly mortality, I would think. But again, I'm not a physician. I don't have any expertise in this.
Okay, but your report doesn't include those costs, does it?
No, that wasn't my commission.
Okay. Now, aside from those costs, the ones that I just asked you about, wouldn't you also agree that there are benefits in breathing clean air that are very difficult to quantify in this sort of economic analysis?
In the type of analysis I performed?
Yes.
Again, I didn't do a regulatory impact analysis. Regulatory impact analysis would take into account all of those social type aspects.
Right, okay. So Mr. Dunham, is it your understanding that oil and natural gas production also results in the emission of methane into the atmosphere?
Well, natural gas basically is methane, so it would be possible. Again, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not an expert in this.
Okay, and do you acknowledge that methane is a potent greenhouse gas?
Madam
I
Hearing
have
Officer,
actually no idea. I'm not an environmental scientist.
Hold on 1 second. I heard an objection of some kind.
yes, Madam Hearing Officer, this is Eric Heiser for NMOGA. Mr. Dunham has repeatedly stated that he conducted a cost analysis of the cost of this rule on the oil and gas industry, that he did not conduct a regulatory impact analysis looking at all the other conceivable costs and benefits of the rule. We could go through and try to identify all of those, but I think the question's been asked and answered.
Mr. DeSalen?
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer. Mr. Dunham has gone into a fair amount of detail in estimating what he considers to be the cost of this proposed rule, and I think that's legitimate for information for this board to hear. But on the same token, I think it's entirely appropriate that the board hear what his report does not include. And I am going into a little bit of detail on that, but not nearly as much detail as Mr. Dunham has gone into. And again, I think that it's important for the board to understand what is not in his report.
I understand that. Keep going, and if you would, I think that's an appropriate line of inquiry. And I'm sorry for interrupting you, Mr. Dunham.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Now, if we could go on, I think your report states, well, your report does state, and I'm going to quote at page 8 of your report, which is attached to your testimony, attached to your written testimony. It says, based on the Western energy model, if the costs outlined above are reflective of the entire industry in the state of New Mexico, the results would be devastating for the oil and natural gas sector of the economy. Do you recall that statement, Mr. Dunham?
Again, I can look for the exact wording, but that would be a true statement.
Okay. Now, would you agree with me that if climate change caused by anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere is left unchecked, the results would be devastating for the New Mexico economy as a whole?
I don't even understand your question, sir.
Let me repeat it. Would you agree with me that if climate change caused by the anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere is left unchecked, the results would be devastating for the New Mexico economy?
I can't even answer that question.
Okay.
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Eric Kaiser again.
Sir.
I can appreciate your desire to let everything into the record as much as possible, but I do think we need to caution the board about testimony by counsel as to these costs, because none of these are in evidence yet.
Okay, no, I take your point, and Mr. DeSalen is going to have to find a basis for the assumptions, and the basis again for the assumptions and the questions he's posing, and I will be paying attention to that. But it's a long record, so I trust he's going to be able to do that later. But thank you for reminding us. Go ahead, Mr. DeSalen.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Now, Mr. Dunham, you mentioned a minute ago the concept of externalities. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Now, as I understand it, the term refers to costs that are external to the price paid for a good or service and are thus borne by other sectors of the economy or by the public at large. Is that accurate?
Roughly, they're the costs that are not associated with the market transaction. So
Right.
It would be both the production and the consumption of a good or service.
Okay. And do you agree that environmental pollution is an example of an externality?
Environmental pollution or pollution of any type is generally considered in a regulatory impact analysis as pollution is an externality.
Right. Okay. And in fact, it's often used as a textbook example of an externality, isn't it?
It's used as it's a commons issue, which is an externality. Yeah.
Okay. And would you agree that installation of pollution control equipment is a means of internalizing external costs?
I'm not an engineer, so I don't know how the pollution control equipment would work, but would internalize external costs by you could I should say internalize external costs by a number of means, including pricing or equipment or different systems.
Okay, so that would include installation of pollution control equipment?
Potentially, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know how pollution control equipment would affect actual pollution.
But if the pollution control equipment reduces the emission of pollution, that would reduce the externality, right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. And that way the total cost of producing a good are more accurately reflected in the price paid for that good. Is that right?
If externalities are reduced, then the market transaction is more reflective of the overall supply and demand costs and yeah, costs of a good or service.
Okay, now, Mr. Dunham, your report includes the costs to the industry of pollution control equipment that would be required under these regulations. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and your report states, and this is at page 5, that under the proposed regulations, there would be as many as 16 provisions that will require additional equipment to be installed and maintained. Do you recall that statement?
Report now, but that sounds yes, that's actually what it does say. You're correct.
Okay, and could you tell us what some of that equipment would be?
It's outlined in table 7 of my report. There are things like compressors, flares, vapor recovery units, etc.
Okay, and zero emission controllers, was that another one?
I do not know because it's not, I have to go back and look at the actual raw data and see if I combine that into something. It's not on my table.
Okay. Okay, that's okay. Now, that equipment will need to be manufactured. Is that correct?
I would assume so, yes.
And the manufacture of that equipment will create jobs. Is that right?
The manufacture of that equipment would create jobs.
But your report doesn't include those additional jobs, does it?
My report is not a report on the emission control industry. It's a report on the New Mexico oil and natural gas industry.
Okay. And the equipment will need to be installed. Is that correct?
I would assume so.
And that installation will create jobs, won't it?
But it will also create costs because the installation of that equipment is part of the
right. But my question is, will it create jobs?
Installing equipment?
Yes.
Installing equipment would lead to jobs. Whether or not it would create it, I don't know. I haven't examined that.
Okay, and that equipment will need to be maintained as well, won't it?
I would assume so, but again, I'm not an engineer. I don't know how the equipment works.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. This technology is not great. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how the maintenance schedules for this type of equipment works, but I would assume that there would be maintenance of any kind of equipment.
Okay, and that that maintenance will create jobs.
It would create activity. Whether or not it would create new jobs, again, I can't tell you because I haven't examined that.
Okay, and the manufacture and installation of the pollution control equipment will also create tax revenues. Is that correct?
Potentially. Again, that equipment could be manufactured completely outside of New Mexico. I didn't examine the pollution equipment industry in the state.
Okay, but the installation would create tax revenues in New Mexico, correct?
Again, potentially, I don't know how the structure of the maintenance reflects on nexus and tax revenue in the state.
Okay, but your report doesn't consider those savings, does it?
My report was to look at the cost of the New Mexico oil and gas industry, not on the pollution control industry.
Yeah, okay. Now, Mr. Dunham, I presume that you're familiar with cost-benefit analysis?
Yes, sir, I am.
And could you explain to the board what cost-benefit analysis is in economic terms?
Cost-benefit analysis is actually really a business concept. It's a examination of the various costs going into we would say a production function, but into an activity. In this case, say drilling an oil or natural gas well. And the benefits would be the resultant revenues that one would make from that well. So if your costs are higher than your benefits, then you don't drill that well, which is kind of what our model is based on.
Now, your report, as I understand it, and I think as you've testified, is more a cost analysis or a cost impact analysis rather than a cost benefit analysis. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
But your firm does do cost benefit analysis, right?
Yes, it does.
And indeed, your firm's brochure states that cost benefit analysis is one of the services that it provides. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And have you personally prepared cost benefit analyses?
Very many of them.
Okay. And so I'd like to ask you why it was that you decided to conduct a cost analysis here rather than a cost benefit analysis.
I didn't decide what type of analysis to conduct. I'm a consultant. I received a commission and I performed that analysis.
Okay, thank you. And then a couple of questions about your model. You referenced the Western Energy Alliance model in your report. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And could you tell us what Western Energy Alliance is?
Western Energy Alliance is a trade association representing the oil and natural gas industry in, let me get this wrong, I'm sorry, I think it's 12 or 13 states.
Okay. And most of the figures that you show in your report are the products of that model?
Some of the figures are the economic impact figures are.
Okay. Now, is that model itself in the record in this proceeding?
The citation to the model is in my report.
But is the model itself in the record?
The entire model? No, it's not owned by anybody involved in this proceeding, I don't.
Okay, Mr. Dunham, thank you for your patience with me here today. I have no further questions.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry about the volume.
Thank you, Mr. DeSalen. Mr. Rose, do you have questions of Mr. Dunham?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Jano?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Boutsier?
No, thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Ms. Gutierrez?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, do we have Mr. Newman or Mr. Colclasher or Mr.
This is Mr. Colclasher. We have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Witherspoon?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to the board for their questions. While I'm doing that, if you are an attendee on this platform and you would have a question, please reach out through the chat. So let's start with Madam Chair. Do you have questions of Mr. Dunham?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Yes, I do have a few questions of our witness, Mr. Dunham. First of all, good morning, Mr. Dunham. Thank you for your presentation and all the information that you provided us this morning, as well as your written testimony and report. Appreciate your time and also patience. This is a lot of information to try to weed through and look back at the basis of the assumptions and the model itself. I just have a couple of clarifying questions in my mind, just so that I'm clear on how the model was put together and again, some of the initial assumptions. So based on your presentation slides this morning, you said the model was developed for Western Energy and Alliance in 2018, and that was really just the structure or how the model was created. Is that correct?
The structure of the model and also the baseline economic impact figures were from 2018 in that model.
Okay, so the baseline economic data is from 2018 then? Is that what you're saying?
The job data, the wage data, the output data, that is from them.
Okay. And in your report, in the tables, so back to like the job data and so forth, in some of the tables, for example, table 12, it refers back to an update to the economic impact. Oh, Madam Hearing Officer, I just want to make sure it's okay to refer to the report, his report. Is that?
Yes, I think it's okay.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So in table 12 of your report, we're looking at a comparison of economic impact from 2020 to 2021, but that economic analysis was done based upon updated job data or 2018 job data?
No, everything is based on 2018 job data.
Oh, okay, including that that update on the tables.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate that clarification. And is that the same assumption for the other tables in your report, like table 10, 11, and table 9?
Maybe 1 second. Table 9, yes.
Okay.
Table 10 and table 11 are data that we gathered based on the wording of the rule when we did this analysis a year ago and when we did this analysis this time, and some different pricing data, things like that. It's not the job data in there.
Okay, so you're saying in some of these tables there were updates on the base assumptions of jobs and some prices? Is that what you're saying?
Not jobs, but on some prices, and that is all in table. I'm just going through this thing myself. Table 3.
Can you repeat that table number? Sorry, I didn't hear it.
Sorry, table number 3.
3. Okay. Okay, I appreciate that. And so in table number 3, you're saying the updated price data that was referenced in table number 3, and I think in your slides earlier, is that the data that was based upon the operational cost, some of the data based upon the operational costs from the survey of the 10 companies?
No, ma'am. This is data based on information from the U.S. Department of Energy and based on information that we interpreted from the state of New Mexico. Though I've been told that I interpreted the natural gas wells incorrectly.
Okay, so so that interpreted data from New Mexico, you're saying, can you repeat that last part again? Sorry, it's kind of mumbled.
Yeah, the number of actual wells, the number of actual facilities is from the state of New Mexico. But again, I have been told I interpreted the number of gas wells in particular incorrectly.
Okay, and can you explain a little bit more of how that interpretation, was it an overestimate or underestimate?
It's an overestimate.
An overestimate, okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Dunham. Again, sorry, I'm trying to walk through all of this data and where all of it's coming from and base assumptions. I appreciate your patience with me. So I understand that in your report, I think it was in table, sorry, I'm scrolling through here really quickly. Oh, yes, it was on page 8 and page 9 in your report. Some of the changes that you referenced from the prior analysis, and you examined the 2 regulations, one going through the OCC and then one going through EIB. And so in your subsequent tables, did that already take into consideration the rules that were passed under OCC?
The earlier analysis was looking at those rules, as well as an earlier version, I believe, of this rule.
Okay, and then the 2021 results that are in tables 10 and 11 and 12, are those does that include the your analysis about the impact with the OCC rules? Or from
No, that does not. No, that's just looking at this rule.
Okay, it's just looking at the EIB rule.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Again, I apologize for all of these questions.
Not at all.
And so in one of the other statements in your report is that the estimated administrative costs of the rule have risen based not only on the higher wages in New Mexico, but because the proposed rule imposes more administrative requirements. And I just wanted to, again, take note is that administrative cost, the assumptions based upon job data from 2018 or 2021?
Now, the administrative cost assumptions are based on a similar rule that had been proposed by the US EPA, and I'm going to get the date wrong. I think it was 2016. And then we took those and applied the current New Mexico, those hours, and applied the current New Mexico wage rates and the number of regulations. So the hours per administrative task times the number of administrative tasks times an average wage rate.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And then in table 11, it talks about the operational and the administrative costs, and it compares the 2020 model to, or numbers to the 2021, and I see a percentage change of administrative costs of 28.9%. And then,
yeah, that's a big
and then, sorry about that. And then an operational cost of negative 2.5%. And so Could you explain a little bit more of why, or explain one, maybe the easy one is why the operational cost went down? And
The operational cost went down based on the number of wells that we were looking at, and as well as the
Mr. Dunham,
changes that
Mr.
happened in the
Dunham,
rule.
Mr. Dunham, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
ma'am.
We cannot hear you. Would you, when you were leaning forward, it was better?
Oh, okay. Is this better? Is this better?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I really apologize for the technology. I gotta get new headphones. The operational cost changed. It's a small change, but that's based on the number of wells that we were looking at changed, and I believe some of the pricing changed a little bit.
okay, thank you so much. And so then the administrative costs that went up 28.9%. You're saying that was based on more the labor hours and the increase in wages? Is that accurate?
Both. Yes.
Both. Okay. All right. And so I know you have another, so I'm going through the tables here, table 12. So you have the 2021 comparison with the 2020 analysis. And again, I just want to make sure I have it clear in my head. So this 2020 analysis was based upon the previously proposed rule that was back in last year, basically, the previous version.
Yeah, but it was the previous version in conjunction with the other rule.
Okay, and then so therefore the 2021 version, is that comparing the passing of the OCC rule and the EIB rule, or just the EIB?
That's just the EIB rule.
Okay, so it doesn't include both, whereas the 2021 did include both.
The 2021 is the separated, what we separated out as this rule from that rule. But again, it's a very different analysis.
Okay. Okay, I just want to make sure I understand what the tables are comparing. And so the 2020 table does include both, and the 2021 doesn't include both.
The 2020 includes it includes just this piece of the rule in conjunction with both, but we ran the models together, so it kind of doesn't really work out that way.
Okay. Madam Hearing Officer, I think that's all I have for right now, and I may have a little bit more questions depending on what the other board members ask. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis, do you have questions of Mr. Dunham? We can't hear you. You're unmuted on my platform, but there may be a setting on your computer. And now your screen is frozen. How about we turn off your video? Okay. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis seems to have frozen in time. Let's give her just a moment. All right, this may take more than a moment. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis, if you can hear me, it may help for you to leave the platform and come back in. That worked for another panelist this morning. Member Cates, do you have questions of Mr. Dunham?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Everything
I can.
working? So yeah, Mr. Dunham, so a couple of quick ones. It's a follow up on what Mr. and I'm sure I'm butchering his name, and I just have to get a document in front of me here before I, to follow up on Mr. DeSalen was saying, so around the notion of the job effects. So if we look at this rule as essentially a large sort of something that would trigger a large sort of private sector infrastructure project through the tightening of a leaky system, then it seems to me it would create a whole variety of jobs that would include, yeah, I don't know, welding, pneumatic controller, skilled sorts of adjustments, and generally it would, in some ways, actually be a plus to the economy in terms of job creation around infrastructure improvements. And I, as a point of clarification, I wanted to make sure that you didn't go there in your report. Is that right?
No, I didn't. However, that's something that economists call the broken windows fallacy. Those kinds of jobs would be created. It's the same thing as if you break windows, you create jobs for glazers. But it doesn't, it doesn't have an overall effect because you're taking away jobs from somebody else.
And so it would be your contention that this rule is not in any way a job creator. Is that correct? Is that your point of view?
It wouldn't generally be a job creator now.
And so another question I have.
I'm sorry, a net job creator, I should say.
I'm sorry, say again.
A net job creator. It would create certain jobs, but it would take away other jobs.
And you don't know what do you have a feeling for what the net effect would be?
No, sir, I wasn't asked to look at that.
Is that I'm sorry, is that a no?
That's a no.
You don't have a feeling, so you don't have a feel for what the net job impact would be from this rule. Okay, so one of the other things you mentioned was that this is going to cost the industry a certain a huge amount of money. I think you said something on the range of $30 billion, and that's based on your assessment of information from 10 different companies. Do I have that about right?
I believe it was $3 billion. And it was based on cost information.
Okay, well that's a big difference, but it's $3 billion is still a lot of money. Did you happen to calculate that number in terms of what's the what is that in terms of the percentage effect on the bottom line of the industry? Is it 10%?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I could calculate that, but if you would like, and I could send you something. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I just wanted so it's a raw number that's hard to put into context without knowing what is the exact what is that in terms of the percentage on the bottom line of the industry. And then I wanted to tie that to, so you did your numbers based on 2018 prices for say West Texas Intermediate crude and Henry Hub prices, right?
No, the model is based on current prices in New Mexico for both oil and natural gas.
Right, and that was that in 2018?
No.
Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. Teresa, where did you lose them?
Okay, in the last answer, it was no, the model is based on current prices in New Mexico for both, and then I did not hear you.
I'm sorry, ma'am, oil and natural gas.
And that was in 2018, right?
No, so that was current prices. That was current as the time I did the model.
And so, okay, and you said current prices the time you did the model. What was the time frame when you did the model?
I believe I have the prices were from, I believe, I can look back in my testimony, I think March and January for the oil, March and January for natural gas.
Yeah,
of this year.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, so the price of natural gas today is $5, I think, and which is roughly double what it was at the time that you did your study. West Texas Intermediate today is $75, which is up considerably from that time. And so my question is, would these higher prices mitigate the numbers, or would they change the numbers in terms of the net impact on the oil industry? That is, would they change the numbers in the report? Would the higher prices affect the bottom line of the changes that are being proposed?
Higher prices would affect the bottom line, not necessarily Henry Hub or WTI spot prices, but the wellhead prices in New Mexico, which are up since we did the report.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's all I have. I appreciate you testifying today, and thank you.
Thank you, Member Cates. Let's return to Vice Chair Trujillo Davis. I'm glad you're able to get back on. Oh, no, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. You're unmuted on the platform.
Can you hear me okay now?
It's very low, very low.
I'll take the next turn.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go to Member Bitzer.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very clearly.
Excellent. I've got the fancy speaker going here that I can move closer to my head and farther away when we have somebody who's very soft. Real quick, first of all, why didn't you look at the royalties lost component? Was that an involved analysis, or just outside the scope of your work? Or?
It was outside the scope of my work.
Any rough estimate off the top of your head what those might be?
No, sir, I don't have that.
Okay. You do this for a living. You've done it for a long time. You've got great credentials. I'm wondering if you have sort of a ballpark in mind for what, because I imagine these your data is, or your results are subject to ebb and flow based on the price of a barrel of oil, for example, or cubic yard of natural gas. But what would let's stick with oil for a minute here. What would a $10 increase or a $10 decrease, a $10 delta do to these figures? How substantially would they change?
The figures would definitely change based on the change in the price. It really depends on the model itself is not linear, so I'd have to actually run it through the model to see. But you can definitely, as prices go up, it's going to have a positive effect on the industry, and we say a negative effect on our impact.
So if the prices,
it'll make the impact less.
Yeah, if the price were to go up, it could offset some of your projected losses then.
Correct, and if it was to go down, it would be the opposite.
And your analysis is static. It assumes the price at what, $55 a barrel?
Yeah, whatever assumption I had, about 56.
Okay, $56 a barrel. But no guesstimate if it went to $65 a barrel, how much the negative impact would be reduced?
I honestly can't give you that and be anywhere near accurate because it's not a linear model.
Right. Yeah, I know the state does an analysis. The state budget people have an analysis by the dollar, I think, for price of oil. But I imagine it's not linear either. But they've figured it out for the full range over the years, so they try to anyway. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Bitzer. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis, I understand we may be able to hear you now.
Can you hear me okay now?
Terrific. Thank you very much. Go
Okay.
ahead, please.
Great. Thank you. I apologize for that. I just had a couple of clarifying questions for Mr. Dunham. You mentioned that the data that you used for your report, you gathered from a survey of NMOGA members. Is that correct?
It came from a survey of NMOGA. Yes, it came from a survey of NMOGA.
And can you maybe give us some insight to what that survey, what kind of questions that survey asked?
I don't have that in front of me. It was a cost survey of various components. But
Okay,
that came to me from NMOGA. You'd have to ask them that.
Okay. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time, Madam Hearing Officer. You can direct me if I'm wrong, but I'd like to ask questions about Exhibit 38, which is the NMED economic analysis, and just where that data source came from. Was it from a survey as well?
First, you have to establish that that is information that Mr. Dunham would have, and then you can ask the question. So, Mr. Dunham, okay. Do you know whether there was a survey involved there?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Okay, I'm sorry, Vice Chair. Then it's not appropriate to question him further about that point.
Okay, that's okay. Are we going to speak to anybody later in the hearing? I checked the Excel spreadsheet, but I didn't see where it was mentioned that we would be talking about Exhibit 38.
So I trust that Ms. Katz, who has 3 witnesses on economic analysis, will be addressing it, but let's double check. Ms. Katz?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. So we do have 3 witnesses to put on in rebuttal for Mr. Dunham's testimony. And I know you're mentioning NMED Exhibit 38, and that's the Pennsylvania General Permit 5A. Is that what you're asking about?
Maybe I have the wrong exhibit number. I was looking at the NMED's cost analysis, but we can come back to that when we do your, after you have your rebuttal witnesses. That's okay. I just wanted to understand where the data was coming from, so.
Yes, and and our data is provided in each section of the rule, so that might be, but yes, you can ask our witnesses when we get to them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so back to Mr. Dunham. Your data came from a survey from NMOGA members, and the loss that you estimated, was that total loss to the company or just loss to the company in New Mexico?
The job losses or the costs?
Actually, both would be really insightful.
Well, actually, both are just New Mexico, yeah.
They're just for New Mexico?
It's all just for New Mexico. They're specific New Mexico models.
Okay, great. That's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Member Duval, I believe you've been with us, but having trouble with your video. Happy to have you question Mr. Dunham using only your sound. Can you hear me? Member Duval? So I can see that you're unmuted on the platform, but I'm not hearing you. So Member Duval is messaging that he's on and he can hear me. I'm sorry, Member Duval, we can't hear a thing. Member Duval, you've been unmuted. I can see that there's a green microphone next to your name, but now he's saying he has no questions. So thank you very much, Member Duvall. Let's move to Member Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I do have a couple of questions. Thank you, Mr. Dunham, for your testimony. The benefit of being the last person is a lot of people already asked some of the questions that I had, but along the lines of the question that I think Member Trujillo Davis already asked is, you said that 10 companies were surveyed and you don't know what the questions were that they were asked. Is that correct?
No, I did not know.
So you're just looking at their answers for your analysis? I'm confused about that. If you don't know what they were asked, what information do you have for your analysis?
I have per well costs for various components of the rule, various equipment and operational components from 10 different companies.
Okay. Do you know if the companies that were surveyed, were they a sprinkling of small companies and large companies? Do you know anything about the size of these companies that were surveyed?
You would have to ask the NMOGA about the survey. Again, I was given the results to work with.
Okay, thank you. Then I thought it was interesting when I think it was Mr. DeSalen asked about a cost-benefit analysis. That definitely would be very interesting to see. Could I ask you, sir, if you had done a cost-benefit analysis, what kinds of benefits would be considered if you were to do a cost-benefit analysis? And I'm not asking you for a hypothetical about how it would come out. I'm just curious about what kind of benefits might be considered in a cost-benefit analysis for this type of industry.
I can give you just sort of an example of cost-benefit analysis. I wrote the manual for cost-benefit analysis for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, for example. And in that case, we would look at benefits of something like this. We would look at benefits to noise, to wildlife, to various types of pollution. Those are probably the largest. I mean, you can stretch a cost-benefit analysis to a lot of kind of things, but it starts getting to be more mucky as you get out. But in this case, the geography matters as well. You have noise happening where you're in the middle of the desert and there's nobody there. It has a lot less value than if you have noise in an urban area. All of those things matter. Time is a thing that you look at a lot. Commuting time, those kinds of things.
Okay, and I'm wondering if you would consider, would there be a benefit to the industry for some of the equipment that they may have to buy that would reduce leakage? Would that be considered a benefit of any kind? I understand the equipment is expensive, but did you in this study or perhaps in a cost-benefit analysis, would you look at the benefit to the company of the equipment that would reduce leakage?
The equipment would show up on the cost side of the ledger. A reduction in leakage would show up on the benefit side of the ledger, either as a pollution type of effect or potentially as a benefit to the company. Again, I would have to really scope out that type of analysis with an engineer. Like an airport analysis, I'm not a pilot. You would talk to the engineers that are working on the runway, the engineers that work with aircraft. That's where you get your information. I'm an economist. I'm not an oil and gas driller, but those are the kinds of things you would look at. Yes.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Member Garcia. Member Honker, do you have questions of Mr. Dunham?
I do have a few. So, good morning, Mr. Dunham, and
Morning, sir.
thanks for your testimony. I'd like to return to the kind of net impact issue that Member Cates raised and Member Garcia just mentioned. Earlier, you referred to the benefits from the company spending all this money for compliance as benefits to the pollution control industry. But it seems to me that these increased administrative costs, the additional monitoring and observations that are required, some of that work the companies may choose to do themselves and might well do. So wouldn't you think, rather than just grouping this as a pollution control industry benefit, the company, there's other employees in the companies themselves would get some additional work or even jobs created in order to meet those aspects of these requirements?
Yes, but again, that's what we call a broken window fallacy. If it's a cost that's not, if it's a cost that's not aggregative to the economy, it's not really an economic benefit, right? If I go into your home and I break all the glass, right, you have to hire a glazer to put new glass in, and that glazer gets work. But that's not a benefit because it cost you to do that, and you could have spent that money elsewhere in the economy. So that's you have to take that into account.
And likewise with suppliers, you calculate, you have numbers of jobs lost to suppliers, but wouldn't some of these suppliers be, as Member Garcia mentioned, supplying the types of valves and seals and fittings that would be necessary in order to upgrade equipment?
Some of those companies would be the suppliers of that type of equipment, I would think.
So I guess my question is, so the direct jobs and the supplier jobs, there would be some degree of positive impact from meeting these requirements that would reduce those numbers to a net number that would be lower than what you have. Is that correct?
Potentially, as I said, if you're doing a regulatory impact analysis, you want to look at all of those kinds of effects. This was an analysis of the cost of the regulation of the industry.
Okay. Couple other questions. I would assume if you're a producer and you're capturing more hydrocarbon because you put additional controls on, there would be some economic benefit of being able to produce that hydrocarbon. Did you look at any plus side from that in terms of your analysis?
No, my analysis didn't look at that.
And then finally, and I'm probably really getting into the weeds here, but it seems like some of these costs, you've lumped all these costs as costs of the ozone precursor rule, but it seems like some of these costs would be incurred to actually improve compliance with current rules that are on the books, either by NMED or by the Energy and Minerals Department. And would there, well, I assume you didn't do any differentiation of the new rules versus improved compliance with old rules in your analysis?
No, sir, most analyses are done ceteris paribus, all things being equal, unless you're specifically bringing in something like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. No other questions.
Thank you, Member Hunker. Madam Chair, I understand you have a few more questions.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and thank you again, Mr. Dunham, for answering all our questions. Like I said earlier, that there's a lot of information and data and model assumptions that you have presented to us, and With that said, I know that we've talked a little bit and legal counsel Katz also mentioned this. Is there a way of looking at your model and having similar, if not the same inputs that maybe enemy D would assume, whether we're talking about cost per barrel or the wage, average wage assumptions that are in your report? Is that possible?
Of course, all models are based on their assumptions, and we can always change the assumptions that we run.
Okay, okay. And as member Trujillo Davis said, I do have just a procedural. So as we get the enemy D model, would there be the opportunity to also hear Mr. Dunham's input or responses, or how will that, that we could ask Mr. Dunham after enemy D's presentation of their economic model? Is that possible?
Would you like me to answer that?
Certainly, Ms. Katz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I apologize for the confusion. The model that I was talking about was the model, the photochemical modeling that Mr. Morris did. And I was simply trying to make the point that for the modeling that we used, for that, we provided all the data and assumptions. We did not do our own economic modeling. We provided cost estimates and emissions reduction estimates, and that's detailed extensively throughout the testimony and in all the spreadsheets that are listed as exhibits. So you'll be able to talk to our witnesses that are testifying to all the provisions of the rules about those cost estimates. So that we do not have a model, an economic model.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Ms. Katz, I appreciate that. With that said, I just have a couple other questions here of Mr. Dunham. So in your report, you had mentioned that there was a minimum of 35 new administrative requirements that would need to be adhered to. And I think this goes to Member Honker's question. So would these be in addition, administrative requirements, in addition to the requirements that are already on the books?
These were changes that were outlined in the text of the rule.
Okay, so was there, I guess, stemming from Member Honker's question, so there was not an analysis done to account for the administrative requirements in order to be compliant with the current laws on the books. Is that correct?
No, ma'am, I didn't go through the entire New Mexico code to figure out what's already on the books. We just looked to see where the rule stated that a new report or a new database or a new some kind of administrative function needed to be performed.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Dunham. I appreciate your time again and being on the hot seat for so many hours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unless there are other questions from board members, I will return to Mr. Heiser and ask if there will be any follow-up or redirect.
Just a couple of questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
Go ahead.
Mr. Dunham, in your line of business doing economic analysis, is it normal to use anonymized cost data?
Oh, yes, often.
And is the reason for that because individual company cost data is very proprietary and would reveal potentially competitively disadvantageous information if it was disclosed about the specific company?
Yes, sir. It's extremely difficult to get individual company data.
And so it's often that you'll have an association or whatever send data to a third party to combine that data and then provide it in an anonymous format to you for analysis.
Yes, sir. We do that all the time for associations.
Okay. And is one of the differences, to Ms. Katz's point, between, say, her emissions model that Mr. Morris presented, which I know you didn't hear, but the model that you do, is there a difference in the legal protections available to emission data and proprietary company financial data?
I'm sorry, so I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea what the legal
That's
provisions are. When I do work, I sign confidentiality agreements. So
that's fair.
Why I can't make data available without permission.
Okay, thank you very much. With respect to Chair Sweeney's questions, and I must say it must be gratifying to you to have a board member have reviewed. Know that, just to be clear, the model assumptions you're using date from 2018, correct?
The base model structure comes from 2018. The job numbers come from 2018. The other assumptions that I outlined in the PowerPoint today are all from the time I did that report.
Right, and so things like the wage system and the price of oil and gas was from the dates in 2021 that you referenced both in your report and in your testimony in response to Member Cates, correct?
Correct, sir.
And will you lay out some more updated information about your model with a correction on the gas well count that you believe may be more appropriate in your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, sir, I did some.
Okay, and so we'll be hearing that in a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I guess that's all the questions that I have. Thank you, Mr. Dunham.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Thank you, Mr. Heiser. We do need to take a break at this point. Let's come back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Let's come back at 11:15. Thank you.